Hey everyone, it's Friday, October the 6th. I can't believe it's October already. And I can't believe I'm doing another BRAP. This is my third BRAP live stream of the week. If you missed it, we had Colin Moriarty on from Last Stand Media this past Tuesday. That was a great show. Please check out that show if you didn't get a chance to. It was super insightful. Great having Colin on. And then we had our regular BRAP on Wednesday. We had Mooch and Warrior join us to discuss some other video game related topics. And I don't know about one more BRAP tomorrow. I don't know about that, Mariano. I don't think I'm gonna have time to do that. But we've got some news. We have some late breaking news to talk about. And with me, I have. He used to be known as the Oracle. He is now known as the Architect. We have Game Logic with us. So, do I refer to you as the Architect moving forward, or?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with the Architect.
All right, so so Architect, Ergo. How are you today, man?
Well, I mean that's what we're here to do, right? To answer the questions that people think are the most pertinent, but are in fact the least relevant.
This is true. Yes, this is true. So. I'm glad you could hop on and do this quick BRAP. Now I will be on Crossfire shortly after we wrap up here on Mooch's channel. Crossfire goes live at 7:00 p.m. Eastern time. So Def Lloyd says BRAP time. Thank you, Def Lloyd. Yes, Blackjack, we back. We are back. So, but yes, I will be on Crossfire at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Mooch's channel. So head over there. What you done listening to BRAP, and we're gonna have some more topics to talk about over there as well. But I do want to get into one particular topic here, and that's Naughty Dog. We talked a little bit about Naughty Dog on Wednesday, Logic, and Architect. We talked about we talked about factions, and the reports of the game being on ice. Them Naughty Dog letting go of the QA or quality control testers, the contractors that were working there, they're gone, and now we see through a leak that through a job posting that the next game, presumably from Naughty Dog, is going to be in fact The Last of Us Part 2 remaster for the PlayStation 5. Now. My quick take, I'm not surprised that they're going to do a Last of Us 2 remaster, given the success of the previous remakes of The Last of Us, and how well those games did. This doesn't surprise me. But as a fan, I'm not saying I'm concerned, but as a fan of Naughty Dog, I'd like a little fan service here. I'd like to get an idea of what they are. We know they're working on a project. They haven't revealed what that project is. It's a game. They haven't revealed what that is. We know that it sounds like Factions is kind of maybe maybe they hit the reset button with the development of Factions. But again, I'm not concerned as much as I'd like to get a little more insight, some fan service into what's happening, what they're working on here. Because as a fan of Naughty Dog and the kind of games that they've released, for me, I'd be disappointed, frankly, if The Last of Us Part 2 is the only contribution, The Last of Us Part 2 remake, or a remaster, I should say. I would be disappointed as a fan of Naughty Dog and the work that they do if that's the only thing we get from them this console generation. But or I almost called you Oracle. So Architect. What are your thoughts about Naughty Dog? Because some people out there saying, "Oh, they're in trouble." I don't think they're in trouble, but there's something here. I think you said this earlier. There's some strings or something to pull at here about what might be happening internally at Naughty Dog.
Yeah, I mean, so I think where I'd want to start is like, what does it matter? Like, why are we even asking this question? And it seems, so part one is it's weird to me that it's this hyper focus on Naughty Dog. Naughty Dog is one studio amongst, I think, what was the last count, 20, 22, 23 Sony PlayStation Studios. So I'm not going to ascribe to them the weight of the entirety of the PlayStation pipeline for one studio. By the same token, they're also not, while their games are, part of a reason why you buy a PlayStation, it's not like they're the Halo studio, right? So I will agree. We put a lot of hyper-focus and emphasis on 343 Studios because they make Halo, and Halo was considered the flagship. We may put a lot of hyper-focus on Turn 10 because as Halo Infinite kind of faded a bit in terms of its shine, we started looking at Forza as the platform flagship. So, I'm not as huge a fan of I certainly wasn't as huge a fan of The Last of Us 2. The Last of Us, the first one, was a bigger story for me. Obviously, the HBO series has, gives them a lot of kind of brand cachet. So I don't know that we look at Naughty Dog and say it's indicative of a problem with PlayStation overall. Then it's the micro question, right? Is something going on with that studio? Again, I don't get overly invested in the gossip and the drama, and I think the pertinent question is what is supposed to be the output of that studio in terms of this generation and its life cycle? And I think that is a pertinent question to be asked, right? Like, if your desire is to get an output from that studio in the life cycle of the PlayStation 5 generation, then what you've gotten is a couple of remasters out of that, right? And a port, right? Well, actually, depending on how you count it, 2 remasters, 2 ports, whatever. And so that's a question, right, and a problem. We talked about on Wednesday, right, that I don't personally think that Factions is as big a deal as some people say it is, but just in terms of getting kind of a flagship title out of that studio this generation, now they've put labor effort into those 2 remasters, 2 ports. They've put labor effort into Factions, which is now not coming out. And so the question is what are they putting their labor effort into in terms of a slate that is going to yield a deliverable outcome, right, this console generation? And right now we don't know what that is. And if it is, and again, let me also caveat that we've had this conversation before. I don't put a ton of stock and content into, corroboration off of LinkedIn posts or, resume posts or whatever as, indicative of what's actually going on at a company. So I'm not ready to buy that that's what's in pipeline. But if it is what's in pipeline, right, then it becomes, again, a more problematic question if they're going to put out another remaster. That's going to slide you into 2024, maybe 2025, and now you've got 3 years left, right, for them to put out a flagship title. And the question is where is that in the slate?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a question that many fans are asking. Are they going to release the title this generation? Again, I mean, and I said this, a couple of minutes ago, but is it dire consequences to the PlayStation brand if Naughty Dog doesn't release a title this generation? No, I think that obviously we see what the PlayStation is doing minus any Naughty Dog game out now. We see that the game is selling gangbusters. Not the game, the console. The console's doing very well. It's actually on pace now to potentially outsell the second best PlayStation console of all time, which is the PlayStation 4. But as a fan, though, I would be disappointed. It's a miss. I certainly look forward. I mean, I would say The Last of Us is one of my favorite games of all time. Last of Us Part 1. And so, yeah, it would be something that I would miss. But again, as a fan. But I think to your point, I think the impact to the PlayStation business, I don't think it's going to have the impact the way some people think it might be or might have. I don't think it's a make or break situation for PlayStation.
Not by any stretch. Not by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, again, going back to the rubric that we sometimes apply, which is, hey, for my $500 investment, right? What are the things that establish my conditions of satisfaction? I just like I said about Xbox, right? The reason I buy an Xbox, the reason why I was in the ecosystem, and the reason I'm disappointed is because I personally bought an Xbox for Forza, Gears of War, Halo, right? And I haven't gotten those things to the extent to which I'm satisfied as a consumer personally.
So you're not satisfied with Halo Infinite.
I was not. No.
So what were the reasons why? What were the reasons that led you to not be satisfied with Halo Infinite?
I mean, my major problem with Halo Infinite is, like I said, they, in terms of achieving their strategic desire and the shaping of that content, what they sold me on, what they sold us on, was that it was going to deliver on games as a service, which means for me, it was going to become a title that I was going to be engaged with, that was going to occupy a ton of my time, that was going to have the content in there that would make me want to constantly come back to the title. Right.
I need to chime in here real quick. So I think it's fun, and I keep coming back to it. I haven't had those problems. It just sounds to me like you're concern trolling.
Well, that may be true. I mean, that maybe I'm just a fake consumer. Maybe I don't actually spend money on games. I think that's the only way I would ascribe any validity to the label, concern trolling.
No, I don't disagree. I mean, with what you said, with Halo Infinite. I mean, that I feel I have the same feelings that you do with that game, and with some of the things that Microsoft didn't deliver. But anyhow, but I do. I mean, do you think that Naughty Dog? I mean, like, there's this conversation around the and I know I hate using social media, but there is a conversation out there that some people think that, hey, Naughty Dog needs to let us know what they're working on. Like, what do you think about that kind of commentary? Because, like, I think, again, as a fan, I would like to know what they're working on. But is it a make or break for me? Like, is it going to make me think more negatively towards Naughty Dog, or make me think that something nefarious is happening? No, it's not. And it's not going to lessen my enjoyment of the PlayStation 5 console right now.
Yeah, I think, for me, it's a matter of, what we've talked about on the show before, which is it's consumer confidence, right? It's owner confidence. And for me, what you need to have is, you either need to understand what the slate is, or you just need to have confidence based on past performance. What we've stood on, very much so, for the PlayStation 5 is that we've stood by them in a status of confidence because of what they've previously delivered, because of past performance. We're just now hitting a tip-over point where that past performance, to a certain extent, has maybe been expended to the point now where we're starting to ask questions. I don't think we're at the point where it's not like Xbox, where we said, you guys have disappointed us for an entire console generation. A lot of the things that you told us were the return to green plan have not come to fruition. And so now when you tell me that you're going to deliver something, when you have consistently, as a trend, missed delivery dates, missed delivery quality, now I constantly have a reason to question. And first of all, I'm already a skeptical person who says, I don't believe anything until it's actually delivered. Like, I don't look at pre-production, pre-release trailers and say, oh, this game's going to be bonga. Which was part of the problem of RedFall in the first place, right? Is the fact that people overhyped it.
You're not like me, Logic, who sees Starfield, right, like, game of the year, man, game of the year.
Yeah,
I
don't do. You don't see in volume for my social media account. You don't see day one comments. You don't see, game of the year comments.
As opposed to my Twitter feed where I'm like, day one, baby.
And I appreciate the love. Everybody's got their cake, right? That's just not mine.
Look, I get it, man. I can't help myself. That FOMO kicks in. I see something shiny, something shiny and new. I'm like, oh, must have, Yeah,
I get it. But I think where PlayStation is they're. And so there's a spectrum, right, of feeling that you go through with these things. To me, they're not anywhere near the hard left side of the spectrum that consumer confidence is, that brand confidence is, that mindshare is with Xbox. But they've also slipped off of where they kind of pegged right at that meter at the 100% point, which is kind of how they sauntered into this generation. They've definitely Like that's definitely started to slide to the left now to where we now ask questions, right? I mean, and you know, because you've talked to me about this for the last 2 years. When you brought things to me like this before, what I've said is this is a nothing burger, right? Like why would I be worried? The last 10 things that they've delivered have been bonga, right? But now I'm at the point now where we talked about this today, and I said no. There's something here to scratch at, right? And part of this is you now after hearing me for 2 years talk about the Microsoft production pipeline and all of the things that are wrong with it, and all of the indicators and all of the factual, tangible, evidentiary, objective things that I can comment on with regards to the Microsoft production pipeline. You can see vestiges of that right now when you look at Naughty Dog. What I look at is okay. In fact, Ryan, we know, said at the beginning of this console generation, when we had this controversy about the marquee studios, right, in the PlayStation stable, right, in the comment that was made that they're not going to, these studios aren't going to go off and create, right, and do risky projects, right? They're going to double down on the stuff that we know hits, right? I'm going to push them to be invested in Uncharted, Last of Us, right? These other IPs and worlds that they know are big sellers. Okay, so that tone was set. Then we see Naughty Dog doing that, right? Which was, like I said, which was already, some people had concern about that because they love PlayStation 4 original IPs for creative new ideas. And the feeling that maybe what was being said was that that's not going to come from the Naughty Dogs, the Sucker Punches, the Insomniacs, right? So now you look at Naughty Dog's track record, where what they have focused on has been treading that ground. And then again, like I said, you look at what was also said in that commentary was that, Jim Ryan wanted more deliveries out of those marquee studios to help drive the revenue for a given console generation, right? So it goes back to my Lifeboat Earth comments, right? That you have a console generation, you're out of the quantifiable number of studios you have, you're only going to get so many releases. The more releases you get, the more revenue you drive, the more you make the car go. So we have Ryan saying, hey, I need to get more deliveries out of my marquee studios. Now you have a Naughty Dog that you start to ask questions about whether or not they've hit that metric. You start to ask questions about how much of that revenue they have driven. And then you start to ask questions about, hey, in a quantifiable finite number of engineering labor hours that can be expended to get deliveries out the door in a console generation, have they burned through so many that they're potentially not going to catch up? And that's a business question, I think, to be asked about what the targets are for the overall PlayStation P&L center. But it's also a question for the consumer side in terms of, what do you feel justifies your $500 investment and what you want to get out of a console? And if a Naughty Dog delivery was one of those things, or some number of Naughty Dog deliveries were those things, have you gotten those, right, as a PlayStation consumer this console generation?
So let me ask you another question here. By the way, it was great points, by the way. But I do want to ask you another question with regards to this remaster. Would a $70 price point, in your opinion, be too much for this?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I didn't feel the $70 price point was too much for the Tilu remake. But
so I'm sorry,
yeah,
I wanted to add to that question. But let's just say they do the remaster, they incorporate some of the things like haptic feedback, 3D audio, things like that. They spruce up the visuals where it looks like a PlayStation 5 game. You still think $70 is too much?
Yeah, now that's coming from my perspective as somebody who lives in software engineering, right? So within the software world, I look at everything through, what was the total level of effort expended, and that total LOE constitutes whatever price I'm charged, right? And so this goes back to commentary that I made at the very beginning of the generation, which was, when we talked about Spider-Man, I was a little salty about that price model, right? And I didn't necessarily feel it was justified. But then for Tilu 1, I was okay with it because I felt the level of effort required to make that remaster and the re-implementation of models, right, and things that they'd done within the engine, I felt like that cost was more so justified. still felt the margins were pretty good, right? We're going to be good. But I felt that overall it was arguably justifiable to charge the $70 price point. But now theoretically, you've done that work, right? The whole reason you forklifted TLU into the TLU 2 engine and made it suitable for PlayStation 5 and that architecture was because you were laying the groundwork and the foundation, right, for future deliveries, right, in that series. So now I'm kind of like, okay, you've now done that work. So now if you come back and you do another remaster where you're building upon work previously done, this generation, right, within a couple of years, right, and you come back and say, hey, I'm going to charge you $70 for the TLU 2 remaster. Now I'm kind of like, I don't know that that's necessarily the kit, right?
Mm-hmm. So you're saying it's a cash grab?
Well, no, I'm not saying that. I'm saying from my personal perspective. And again, this is a focus in a way that not everyone, right, is going to view purchases in the industry. I would tend to think, if you build cars for a living, right, then the way you view car pricing is probably a little different than most people who don't build cars for a living, right? So this is, my personal perspective. I don't necessarily know. It's not necessarily a commentary on how the rest of the market is going to look at it.
Yeah. Well, I guess the other thing too is, they are. We talked about this. These companies are in the business to make money. That's gonna factor into this price point. And look, I mean, we may both say we don't agree with the $70 price point, but I think in the same token, it's going to sell at $70.
I mean, in general, I kind of feel so. If I isolate and I just think about TLU and TLU 2, and I think about Naughty Dog, and I think about all.
By the way, and I don't like. I wouldn't want it. Like my preference would not to be would be not to pay $70 for this remaster. It just like I think $60 is probably fair given the amount of lifting required.
But the question is, will you?
Yeah.
I mean, we say all the time.
So you say the question is, would I pay 70?
Yeah.
You know what? Probably, because I want to play it, and that's the problem. Yeah. Like they know that consumers are going to go out and pay $70. The best thing we can do, and I could do, is say, no, I'm not going to pay $70. Just wait for it to go on sale.
Yeah. So look, I paid for the TLU 1 remaster. I actually paid for the Red Dead Redemption re-release on PlayStation 4. I'm not going to pay for the TLU 2 remaster because I didn't like that game well enough. Right? I paid for the TLU 1 remaster because I felt it was worth it to me to get those PlayStation 5 implementations and get all of that stuff refreshed and play it in the best presentation it's been given up to this point. I paid for Red Dead Redemption because I'd never played Red Dead Redemption before. So I didn't look at it as sunk cost or money I paid before. It was going to be my first time touching the property, and I felt like it was fine for me to play it on PlayStation. Yeah. Now, given that they've just polished it up further, I'm even happier or better off, with that purchase. But the TLU 2 remaster, I didn't like TLU 2 enough. I played through 19. I did 2 runs on the game. I played 19 hours, and then I played like 20 or 21 hours. And each time, as I was closing in on the end, I was just like, "F this." And so I'm not personally going to pay for it. Now, then, the brand question I ask you is, the TLU brand may be strong enough to warrant playing at Bogart and charging $70 for the TLU 2 remaster, but then the PlayStation brand overall, do you feel like there is enough brand loyalty there to pull that move twice within a couple years' time in the generation without shaking off some of the brand confidence and brand loyalty you've earned in the PlayStation 5 generation?
I'm sorry, are you asking me that question? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry. So you're asking me if there's. I'm sorry.
I'm asking you. Does charging $70 for the TLU 2 remaster start getting you some of that energy that you got at the PlayStation 3 launch, where people are saying, "This is arrogant."
Okay, I see what you're saying.
You're getting out of touch and out of tune with your consumer base.
Yeah.
And it's too much.
Yeah, for me, okay, so here's my thing about The Last of Us. They are milking that franchise. I mean, that's... Now, is it to the point where I feel like they're getting arrogant? No, because they're not telling me go out and get a second job. They're not, they're not going out and saying, okay, we're gonna do a remaster and charge you $100 for it. But I do think that they are at a point now where they are milking that franchise. I mean, it's the only way I could say it. And I understand, like, it's a popular franchise. They know people are going to buy it. I get that. I understand that. But Naughty Dog hasn't released anything new since The Last of Us Part 2, which was in summer of 2020. Was it July 2020? And I get it. We're 3 years, since their last release. I get that. But in that 3 years, they've done. We had a PlayStation 4 remaster of The Last of Us. Then we had a PlayStation remake of The Last of Us. Then which charted NPD. So I understand that's going to drive a lot of the decisions with how they handle The Last of Us Part 2. I get that. I get the business part of it. But to answer your question, I don't think they're there yet, Hamp. I don't think we're at a point where, like, Sony is, they're kind of they're being arrogant. Sony, they're not really, they're kind of gone back to the ways of the PlayStation 3. I do think, though, if the competitor in Microsoft, and I would say Microsoft's probably the biggest competitor in the market to Sony, if Microsoft was releasing new AAA IPs and they were knocking it out of the park with those new games, and I'm talking about these games are really moving the needle for the platform. So think about, like, how the first Halo impacted the Xbox platform and the conversation in the industry. Oh, that's right. Thank you, Cal. The Uncharted Legacy Sea of Thieves collection. That's right. They did that. So they are milking these franchises. But look, people are buying them. So there's something to be said for that too. And I get that. But I think if the competition was putting out quality and games that really move the needle, that are the conversation in the industry, that are getting people
at volume, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. Then and doing so in Game Pass, which people, the value proposition there with Game Pass and not having to spend $70. If they were doing that, I think that there'd probably be a little more focus on what Naughty Dog and what Sony's doing. Like, compared to, but because that's not happening, I think that there's probably a little more leeway, I guess, with what Sony's doing, or what Naughty Dog's doing. But again, just so everyone's clear on this about what BRAP is saying, because I know people say that I'm not critical of PlayStation. I do think they're definitely, Naughty Dog's definitely milking this, and I hope that as a fan of the studio, I want to see new IP. I'm at a point now where I don't want to see more remastered IP from them.
Yeah, it's kind of like the conversation you and I have a lot, right?
I hope that answers your question, by the way, Logic.
Yeah. No, and I mean, you're getting to it, and I'm just shaping it up by this comment. Like, it's a bucket, right? And you're not in extremis until, in my opinion, you've emptied. What's that?
We talk about those tokens in the bucket.
That's right. That's right. You put tokens in the bucket. You're not in extremis until you burn, 50% of those, right? You start getting in the danger area when you burn through down to 2/3, right? When you're at 0.7%. I don't think PlayStation's at that. Like you said, they've taken a little bit of shine, right, off the brand. Maybe to where they're, maybe arguably dipped down into the low 90s, maybe high 80s, right? And just like you said, if there were a competitor on the market, right, now maybe somebody's smelling some blood in the water, right? And now maybe it's a time to do some things more aggressive, or to get out over your skis and push a little harder and try and take some of that market share. Yeah. But there's not really a competitor in the market doing that.
And Logic, and to your point about PlayStation 3, I think, at the time, the success that the 360 was having, I think just further magnified Sony's arrogance at the time. The fact that they were charging so much money for the PlayStation 3, the fact that they told us to get a second job, and then you had the Xbox 360, which was a viable option in the market at the time.
Right. This is what makes me so angry about the console war comments. Right. This whole foolishness last year of like, oh, Jim Ryan's scared. Like that says volumes about your maturity. That also says volumes about people who just don't know what they're talking about and haven't been around and don't look at historical context. We have seen a scared PlayStation. We have seen a scared Sony. We have seen a PlayStation back on their heels, trying to figure crap out, trying to come out of the corner swinging. That was the PlayStation 3 generation, Sony. That was the generation where they said, let's change the leadership, let's move Kaz around, right? Let's give him more latitude, let's empower him more, let's get some things out of his way, right? Then they doubled down and focused on let's start speaking to the gamer and start speaking less about the business. Let's start making this a conversation about entertainment and about creativity. We have seen a PlayStation playing the role of Rocky Balboa, right? Backed into the corner, eyes puffy and bloody, right? And come out of the corner swinging. And out of that, we got Uncharted. Out of that, we got Uncharted. Yeah. We got Ratchet and Clank. We got Resistance, right? And yes, some of those things we kind of seen that glimmer in their eye, but we started seeing more of the, I guess what I would call the Hello Games kind of response, right? We saw more of the, let's put our heads down, let's put shoulder to grindstone, let's figure this out, right? Let's start winning hearts and minds, right? And stop being jerks, right? We have seen a Sony that was scared, that was trying to figure out a response. That's not the Sony that we saw in the Jim Ryan response, right?
No, not at all. I mean, they're not scared. I mean, they're releasing remasters of remakes. They are. I mean, they are. Look, I mean, they're quiet. They don't put on these. They don't really engage the media the way they used to. And look, despite like. I guess, God, that's a great question, by the way, that you asked me, Logic, because it's got me thinking about kind of where PlayStation is right now. And I guess what I'm wondering and I'm thinking is if the other studios, not just Naughty Dog, if the other studios don't start showing new IPs, because I think to an extent people have been spoiled on the PlayStation platform with these new first-party AAA franchises. And not that the fact that they're just new, the fact that they're critically acclaimed across the board. They're often in the conversation for Game of the Year. You talk about like Uncharted. Remember when Uncharted first came out of place for the PS3? Remember the impact that that game had, and then you start seeing, and then they end the PlayStation 3 generation with The Last of Us. I guess I'm wondering what happens if they don't start creating. You said this earlier, something about Jim Ryan saying they want their first party AAA studios to focus on, maybe not necessarily take risks, but focus on games that they know are going to appeal to the masses or sell well or whatever. What happens to the psyche of the PlayStation diehard fan or the community if they don't start releasing or presenting those new AAA IPs? If it's going to be like Ghost of Tsushima 4, or if it's another iteration of God of War, or if it's another iteration of The Last of Us, maybe it's not the story of Ellie, but now it's the story of oh gosh, I forget her name now. Abby. What if the Uncharted series what if the Uncharted series has a spin-off of different characters? We've seen that already. And there's presumably an Uncharted game that revolves around Nathan Drake's daughter. So what happens if we don't get those new IPs? Does that hurt the brand?
Yeah, it's tough, right? Because I don't necessarily know that it squelches down entirely on new IPs. And I also don't know, right, because we've got Spider-Man 2 coming.
And I'm sorry, because we kind of see. I feel like we kind of see this in Hollywood right now, where it's a kind of a churn of just like established IPs or properties that Hollywood knows is going to appeal to. Like I call it the comic book problem in Hollywood right now.
I mean, maybe like to a certain extent. I also don't put. Yes, again, I think it takes a little bit of the shine off of the notion of maybe the way that it would used to be. I also think that sentiment is sometimes not entirely correlated by data, because again, you look at the last 20 years of television, and there are great things that we've gotten, and maybe that well is running dry now. But like when I look back, when I look back at the things we've gotten over the last 20 years of television, and then I look back at the 20 years prior to that,
Game of Thrones.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Game of Thrones, the CW verse, some of the things that we got, before sci-fi really started screwing everything up. But some of the great things that we got out of the Sci-Fi Channel, Stranger Things, other things, like that. Like those are things we just would not have gotten, from 1980 to the 2000s, right? Like properties like that were like maybe you'd see one, right, on one network a season if you were lucky.
Yeah.
But we have gotten tons of content that has been epic in scale, epic in its storytelling and its world building, in ways that just previously haven't been seen in the industry. So flipping back to games, I don't know that it's entirely squelching down on new IPs. We're getting Spider-Man 2, and yes, there are naysayers and negative Nellies and all that stuff that try and scrag on Spider-Man 2. I am in no way disappointed by the coming of Spider-Man 2. Like I look forward to it. Miles Morales is one of my favorite games ever. And so I'm super looking forward to more of that. But when I look at God of War Ragnarok, I say, okay, yeah, God of War 2018, yes. God of War Ragnarok, okay, right? A third iteration of that, I worry about that being a little problematic if it doesn't change a lot of its design, ethos and approaches.
You got to imagine though that they're going to do a spin-off with Atreus.
I mean, maybe. I don't. Maybe.
I mean, I only say that again. I could be wrong. But it seemed like because there is a part of the game. Well, I don't want to spoil it. Have you beat the game?
No.
Okay. You know what? I'm not going to say it. Never mind. Just.
Okay. So I think my thing is Cory Barlog already marshaled that team,
by the way.
Right, and he already had marshaled that team around the notion that they wanted to, just again going back to the television analogy, right? The greatest television series are the ones where the showrunner, the creative mind behind it said, I want to finish now is like, look, we want to go out on a high note, right? Versus these series that go on forever, right, and become bad right before they are finally canceled. Right, the best television shows are the ones that are never canceled.
Don't talk about Star Trek.
The showrunner and the creator says, "What's that?"
Don't talk about Star Trek like that.
the greatest shows are the one where the team says, "Hey, we're going to finish telling this story, right, in this season, right," and drives towards that. And so I don't necessarily have a fear or concern of the portfolio overall. The other thing I want to mention is, Herman Hulse is the head of studios now. Remember, Herman Hulse was the guy who engineered the shift of Guerrilla, right, from doing Killzone to Horizon Forbidden West. And I will still mark that down from a historical student perspective of, in my opinion, one of the most monumental and successful shifts in a studio that I've ever seen. Like, that is not the norm. Most studios these days are making the 10th, 11th, 12th iteration of the same thing that they've been doing and the same thing that made them famous. And that team said, enough. You guys have asked us to be the Halo killer for decades now. That ain't working, right? We want to do this. This is our vision. And not only did they do it, but they did it superbly. Like that's so double kudos for them. And that's the guy who said at PlayStation. I don't know that it's interesting. It's going to be interesting to see. I think you asked me the question last week about, maybe, what did we think was going to happen now with Jim Ryan exiting the scene. And at the time, I said, I don't think it's going to be this major groundswell shift, right, in course. But now I'm actually wondering, Hulst, I think is a person who would be supportive of if Neil Druckmann came and said, hey, we don't know that we want to double down on Uncharted and Last of Us. We want to do a new thing. Like, look at these guys over here, what they did with Starfield. You know, Starfield has problems, but yet the point is that that team creatively got to pivot, shift, right, and do, yes, it's more of the same thing, but they weren't forced to do the next Skyrim, right off the bat. They weren't forced to do, the next Fallout, right? And yes, those things were already in motion when they got acquired. But the point is that that team got to make a decision to march off in a direction creatively that they felt was going to be satisfying. And so if Neil Druckmann came to Herman Hulst and said, hey, we want to do something different, I think Herman would be supportive of that. And so that may be a shift that we see, and that is allowable depending on who comes in to replace Jim Ryan, right? If Herman Hulst is able to hold, that sway and that influence.
See, I've always wondered with Jim Ryan, because he's a numbers guy, if part of his thought process was, look, let's not take too many creative risks. Let's bet on the short thing because we need to make money. And with the swelling budgets of AAA games coming, being in the $300 to $500 million, it just makes sense for us financially just to do the sure thing, to take IPs that are established and build out those IPs, whether it's new characters within that particular brand or franchise, kind of like what they've done with the spinoff with Uncharted. Is maybe Abby gets her own game out of, The Last of Us.
Yeah, I don't want to see that. I'd rather than wrap that story up and move on. I
disagree.
And I think you've got 3 super chats that I've seen go by. I think.
Yeah. I do need to get some super chats, but go ahead, man.
As you're getting those right, the question I'd float out there is, I think the question I'm starting to ask, and I think the question people need to start asking is, like, the diehards and the fanatics, they're in the PlayStation ecosystem. I don't know that any of this impacts them, right, and shakes their confidence. I think the question becomes, as we're spooling up right to the back half of this generation and making our approach to the next, how are you incentivizing and how are you shaping new customers coming into the market, right? And that to me is shaped by what is the image of the PlayStation brand now? Because what I can firmly say is this back half of the console lifecycle definitely right now does not look like the front half. In the front half, we came off of the banger fireworks ending of PlayStation 4, which was amazing.
But even PlayStation 5, though, I mean, like, the launch of PlayStation 5 was actually pretty solid.
No, that's what I'm saying. But it's, I'm saying it's that launch was platforming off of the closeout of PlayStation 4, right? Where we got TLU 2. It goes to Tsushima. I always want to say Onimusha, right? Where that was, and we had at Spider-Man, right? And we knew that we were getting Miles Morales, right? You were going out on an incredibly strong brand loyalty, brand image wave, and what I can definitely say is, that wave has crested, and it's kind of losing some of its energy, and it's not holding as much surf, right? It's heading towards the beach. And the question now is, what does the back half of this console generation look like from a brand image and a brand confidence perspective?
That's a great point.
I'll let you get the super chats.
No, that's a great point, Lacha, because they really hit it out of the park early on this generation. Sony did with the launch of the PlayStation 5. And you're right, coming off PlayStation 4 with The Last of Us Part 2, Ghost of Tsushima, and then you're getting into the launch of the PlayStation 5. You have all these great titles, that big AAA titles, the new Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, the remaster or remake of Demon's Souls, which was phenomenal, but it has been a little quiet. It has, and so I'm wondering, like, what the tail end of this generation is going to look like for PlayStation. I get the sense that we shouldn't be surprised if we see more third-party exclusives. I could be wrong, but just the way it seems to be shaping up, if you look at some of the games that are coming out next year, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is the big one, but that's a third-party exclusive. So what has surprised me, and I remember Jim Ryan talking about them leveraging, and there was reports. I mean, I always think about the report by Imran Khan when he discussed Sony being very aggressive and outbidding Microsoft for third-party exclusive content for the PlayStation. And you remember, look what they did with, we don't know what's going to happen with Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, that remake that was supposed to happen. It sounds like that's in trouble. But that was another one where Sony, got the exclusivity for that. So I guess I'm wondering if it's going to be more third-party exclusives towards the back end than first-party stuff. So let me grab these super chats here quickly. Let's see here. We have a super chat from Miles with the $5 super chat. Says, the issue to me is Sony seems AAA or bust. No studio working on games that are smaller in scope. Yes, they won't have as big return, but they hold us over. Yeah, but but Sony's done a pretty good job at getting some of those smaller titles, whether it's through timed exclusivity. If I think about what was the one with the cat? I forgot the name of that game now.
Yeah, Stray.
Stray. I almost said Blinks, but Blinks is that's a different game. And then they also had what's the other game that came out that was reviewed well? God, why am I forgetting the name? It had the girl in it. It was almost like why am I drawing I'm drawing a blank here. Kenna, thank you. Kenna, Bridge of Spirits. Sifu. Thank you, Afropunk, by the way. Yes, thank you everyone in the live chat for, everyone's like, Kina BRAP, like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, even you think about that, I forget what that Hawk game was that was a launch title.
Yeah, the Hawk game that you fly around, whatever, yeah.
Yeah, that eventually it made it to, but it was a timed exclusive on Sony.
Exclusive, yeah. So, I mean, I think they've, to kind of fill that void with smaller stuff, they've leaned with, Team, Astrobot was one. But Astrobot's actually a really good game. But
I kind of see his point, right? Just in terms of it's not necessarily an overall difference, but it is a difference in allocation, right? Who's fulfilling those orders, right? When I go back to the PlayStation 3 generation, one of the things I used to always comment on is games back, first party studio games back then were not the megalopolises that they are now, right? The expectations weren't as high. Like those games in the PlayStation 3 generation did not sell like 18 million, north of 20 million, right, units, right, in the teens of millions units, right? They sold single digit millions of units. And I feel like that's what they were oriented and vectored around, right? What is the series that I always forget that is it Sucker Punch? That's Infamous, right? Infamous, Uncharted when it first started, Resistance, like those types of, and Resistance wasn't first party, I get it, but my point is that it seems like there was heavier investment in the portfolio then in not Michael Bay blockbuster, summer blockbuster, Avengers Endgame type of games, right? That those games filled that, hold the course, hold steady part of the portfolio. And I think there were fewer, right, like big windups, like grand slams. But it seems like he's saying, like everything coming out from a Sony first party studio has to be a summer blockbuster grand slam.
That's true,
right?
Yeah.
And they're filling that, hold the course, hold steady content part of their portfolio with third party exclusives. It seems like.
Yeah,
and so that's
a good point.
I'm not saying that that's bad. I'm not necessarily saying that that's like something we shouldn't want, but I could definitely see why it raises a question.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I mean, it's you're right. Compared to previous generations, you're absolutely right. It does seem like AAA or bust. It's got to be a big blockbuster coming out of Sony first party studios. I want to get to Andy Hart with the £5 super chat. Says Banshee is a great example of brilliant show running its course. Thank you for that super chat, Andy.
You had another one that came out first, I think.
Oh, did I? Hold on.
Another one from Andy Hart.
Oh yeah, you're right. Andy Hart with another £5 super. Thank you, Andy Hart. The fight with the £5 super chat says, "Good evening, BRAP and Logic. Would like Logic's thoughts on Forza Motorsport. From what I've seen, it's looking impressive."
Yeah, I don't have a ton of thoughts on it right now. I haven't played it. I walked into this week saying, as much as I said I never do day one, there are a very, very small number of titles, I can count them on one hand, that I would do day one for. Forza Motorsport and Forza Horizon have historically been in that bucket. But I just recently plunked down for Cyberpunk 2077, which I did not play at launch. Now that it's been buffed with the 2.0 patch, as well as the Phantom Liberty content. So that's on my slate right now. I am actually going to go back to Starfield on Xbox and also play some... I'm also going to pick up EA FC24 for the Switch. I already have it for PlayStation 5, but I've got a few other things on my slate now that look right now like I'm not going to jump in feet first into Forza like I normally do. So I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Cyberpunk 2077, we have an update regarding RedFall. So RedFall is getting an update, and it's finally going to get a performance mode, 60 FPS, finally, which is something I thought should have been there day one launch. So here's an update from Bethesda.net. According to Bethesda.net, RedFall's Game 2 update, the patch brings a performance mode to Xbox X or Series X and S. It brings stealth takedowns, new controller settings, accessibility improvements, and much more. Some of the performance and stability things that they're addressing, they're fixing an issue with resetting game settings to their default values while in window display on a second monitor. Anti-aliasing setting is now hidden in video settings while AMD FSR 2.1 upscaling is enabled. But I think the biggest one, my biggest takeaway here is that it's going to finally bring that 60 FPS performance mode, which it did not have at launch, which was kind of interesting given how RedFall doesn't appear to be a game that's very visually demanding per se. But this has sparked some interesting dialogue here, Logic, where some people are saying, well, maybe this game could rebound in the way as Cyberpunk has rebounded. I don't know. I don't know if it's... I guess my question to you, Logic, is it too late for this update to have any kind of meaningful impact to the game? Because that's kind of the conversation I've seen. I've seen some people say, hey, it's a great update, but it might be too late. And some people have replied to that particular commentary as, was it too late for Cyberpunk 2077? And I'm like, well, those are completely two different situations. In that Cyberpunk 2077, as we discussed prior to going live and we discussed today, was a game that was really on a lot of people's radars, given that it was a new IP, the first new IP in quite some time from CD Projekt Red, who was coming off the successor of The Witcher 3 and the DLC associated with The Witcher 3. There was a lot of excitement and I guess hype, if you will, day one excitement for this game, for Cyberpunk. And you know, Cyberpunk, Slomo brought this point up on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it, which I thought was a great point, was that Cyberpunk falls within the wheelhouse of CD Projekt Red in terms of being this, open world, RPG experience where Redfall was really, and as you've mentioned, I know when we talked about the anticipation of Redfall, you were kind of telling folks to kind of tamper the expectations because this is kind of uncharted waters for Arcane, for what Arcane had traditionally developed in terms of games. When you think about Dishonored series and so forth, and this being a live service game, but so what do you think, Lodge? Do you think that this update's a little bit too late to have any kind of meaningful impact on the game? And is this a situation where maybe there could be some kind of comeback? I don't see a comeback. Again, I think it's too late. And I think in part too, because I don't think there was a solid foundation with Redfall. I just don't think it was a good game. comparison to Cyberpunk. At least with Cyberpunk 2077, there was a good foundation there, despite its launch issues on console. If you had the opportunity to play for it on PC, and I see people saying, "Oh, was it too late for No Man's Sky?" Froggy T, right? Shocker. Saying, was it too late for very different games? I mean, I think the part of the issue that I'm having with this conversation of, well, was it too late for game A, B, and C, is that, well, there's a little more context associated with that conversation as opposed to, was it too late for a certain game? As in, was that game good? Number one, did that game have a good foundation? Was there interest in that game? What are your thoughts, Logic?
Yeah, and people are also skating by the fact that the scenarios were just radically different.
Exactly.
And it seems to be there's an attempt to ascribe similarity where similarity doesn't exist. And I'm also when I'm commenting here, I'm also going to swing back and hit a couple comments that I missed in the chat because I wasn't paying attention to it. So Josh Ayers, just looping back to our older conversation, says we are talking like Naughty Dog didn't put out a game in 2020. Yes, they put out TLU 2 on the PlayStation 4, and we're now on the PlayStation 5. And whether you admit it or not, there are some people who are going to look at things through the lens of what has a studio done for me this console generation. And it also begs the question, like I said, it's just questions to be asked. It also says, okay, you put it out in 2020. It's been 3 years. I'm going to give you 5 years of a development cycle. And the question is what is that studio? Some people are going to ask, what is that studio going to put out? And what I'm saying is right now we don't have visibility that lends us necessarily confidence on what Naughty Dog is going to put out in or around 2025. Particularly if people are buying into the rumor that what they're working on is TLU 2 remastered, right? That runway, like I keep saying, the runway is finite, right? In what can be done. So going back to this conversation, the Cyberpunk scenario and the RedFall scenario were not the same, right? Even let's take off the table, some of the other stuff, but just simply, one comment made by one person who we've been going back and forth with today was, the conversation around Cyberpunk was the same as the conversation around Redfall. No, it was not. The conversation around Cyberpunk was that.
Real quick. I'm sorry. That's this. There was an individual who said that a lot of the negative feedback with about Redfall was the same for Cyberpunk. I'm like, no, that's not remotely close.
Right. The conversation around Cyberpunk. So the conversation around I'm trying to decide which one to start with. The conversation around Cyberpunk was that, as far as we can tell, the game played fine on PC, which is why on PC it got really high scores. The game even played fine on Stadia, to the extent that part of the narrative at the time was that Stadia was the best place to play Cyberpunk, to avoid a lot of the bugs and problems and patching and yada, yada, yada. Play it on Stadia. So there was a version, right? Then the negative conversation about it was how CD Projekt Red had been disingenuous about how that game played on older generation consoles and what the expectations were for delivery on next generation consoles. The conversation around Redfall is that it don't play good anywhere. And it is not a good game on any platform.
Yeah, and by the way, I see like people talk about No Man's Sky. Even No Man's Sky, we'll use this one metric here. We talk about critical reviews and people's perceptions of the games who reviewed No Man's Sky. Despite the missing features with No Man's Sky, it still managed a Metacritic 71. The Metacritic for Redfall is 56. 56. Like, that should tell you something. But go ahead. To your point, Logic, like, Redfall's not good anywhere. It's just not a good game.
Yeah, it's not regarded as a good game, right? By what it appears to be a big part of the market. Yeah. Ice Queen mentions No Man's Sky is better than it was at launch because it has 60 frames per second in VR, and I'm not entirely sure the context of that is that if that was an agreement with what we're saying or a disagreement. The thing that jumps to my mind is on PlayStation 4. I don't recall us being as wrapped around the axle about 60 frames per second being a target for that console generation for like every title, right, as a minimum requirement. But so, I mean, the conversations were just different. The conversation around No Man's Sky was more about how the game didn't deliver on the promise of what you could do in the game and the content in the game. which is different than the conversation around Redfall, which is, I don't know that anybody's talked a lot about Redfall being content incomplete, other than not having enough variation, maybe in weapons, in the weapons upgrade progression path. But most of the conversation around Redfall appears to be about how, the art's not great, the graphical fidelity is not great, and the performance isn't great. And it does feel a little vapid, maybe from a mission structure perspective, in terms of the variance of the missions and a feeling of completeness from that perspective.
God, even the hitboxes are terrible. Like when you're shooting vampires, like it's like some of the shots don't even register. Like go ahead.
So again, to bring it back even to the greater point of relevance is, and even with all that being said, I feel the conversation and the reason that there are questions around it is not a matter of, for you as an individual or for me as an individual or the viewers as individuals, whether or not it's too little too late for them to go back, right, and pick up Redfall, right? Oh, by the way, for you to go back and find friends to pick it up with, since it's sold as, being an immersive, like, multiplayer co-op title. But the question is what is going to be the market response? And the point that we're saying is, despite all these things that everybody's saying, this game had that Metacritic score, or this game was considered badly too, or whatever. No, the point of it is for us to bring in the context of what is the cultural relevance of this title on the marketplace, what was the groundswell and the uptake of this title on the marketplace. Are people going to go back to it in droves now that it has a 60 frame per second patch? Is this going to move the needle for sales numbers or Game Pass subscribers for the Xbox business model? And I think, in my personal opinion, the answer to all those questions is no. You look at Cyberpunk, which for whatever reason people are trying to draw that comparison. Cyberpunk, before Elden Ring, was winning all of these game show awards that put out awards for most anticipated game or biggest reveal or things that people are most excited about. That was not true for Redfall. Didn't have anywhere near that pedigree walking up to the launch.
That was never true for Redfall. I mean, there was so much excitement, anticipation around Cyberpunk, considering the pedigree of CD Projekt Red, considering what they had done with The Witcher 3, considering that this was a tabletop adaptation of, video game adaptation of a tabletop game. But you're right. I mean, logically, there wasn't that excitement for Redfall and the ways that there was excitement for, Cyberpunk 2077.
Right.
And despite its issues at launch, especially on console, like I said, and I said this earlier, there was still a very good game underneath all that, the performance issues.
Right. And then you look at the timing, right, in the state of the industry. Like, are you going to get traction on that title for putting out a 60 frame per second patch when there's the content that's out on the market now, when Baldur's Gate 3 is out, when Starfield is out, when Spider-Man 2 is about to release. What's that?
We got COD that's getting ready to release.
Right, yeah. Right. It's kind of like, if you want to try and draw an analogy, right, to people, the question I would be asking was, is the 60 frame per second patch for Redfall making you feel like Titanfall, was it the original Titanfall or Titanfall, right, when it released sandwiched in between Battlefield and Call of Duty that year? Because that's what this feels most analogous to me about is, great. The entire summer I ranted and raved about the responsiveness of Xbox to putting a patch out for this game, which it can't be described as anything other than a PR nightmare and an absolutely horrifically brand damaging thing in the way Redfall was handled, tightly coupled with the notion that they missed the 12-year plan and missed delivery on all the things that they were supposed to put out in 12 months. Redfall became the only thing. By the way, making the significance of its failure even bigger, because there were 5 or 6 other titles around it that were supposed to release to soften that blow, right? So all summer there was a lack of speed to respond to this, while I'm going to say, and people are going to be mad, I look at the responsiveness of PlayStation to the horrific launch of the TLU 1 port, right, which admittedly should have theoretically have been an easier thing to respond to, since it was a port and it was not a brand new from the ground up game. But the fact of the matter is that game was patched several times over, right, and now has good ratings over on Steam in comparison to how Redfall's been handled, where the patch frequency and speed has been relatively anemic. And now you get the 60 frame per second patch out on October 6th, right? When all of these, this is the biggest launch month of a already fully packed year. And I'm like, I don't know how you expect anybody to pay attention to that, right? In the currently crowded market that we have. And then for you to attempt to make a projection off of that this is going to allow the game to return to green and it's going to experience, a return to the fold of players who have fallen off. Other people have other stuff to do, So I just, the question, is it too little, too late? I think that the answer is a resounding yes.
Yeah, I would agree. And does Arcane, have, the time to really, put the rub in, if you will, for this game? I mean, obviously they're doing a performance patch, but how much more time is Arcane going to expend on this game too? We know that, Cyberpunk's a little bit different. I mean, Phantom Liberty cost them about $86 million to make. So Forte says I'm late. What happened with Redfall? Forte, Redfall is finally getting a 60 FPS performance mode patch, and there's some other things you're addressing too, but that's the biggest thing that's coming out of this patch. So, but I agree with you, Lach. I think it's a little bit too. I think it's too late to have any real impact. And again, I don't disagree that you could fix or patch any game, but what we're talking about is the impact of that particular patch to this particular game. So,
yeah, and I agree with what some of the people are saying. Look, if there's an expansion pack and there's like a thing that tweaks, and the other comment that I heard from people was that like I don't think that the progression in the game really like felt impactful, right, in a way that really kept people engaged and made them interested. So, but I absolutely agree. If you do what Cyberpunk did and you like radically overhaul the game and the way progression works and the way some other things work, if you put out content for it that deepens the game and makes the experience wider, all of those things could definitely lend to the game, making a return to green. If you do things like I would, again, people won't like it, but I'll say, Ubisoft does, right, in terms of, sticking with a game for an extremely protracted life cycle and delivering content, even though, they haven't always remained true to, roadmaps they've put out. I get that, but, what I see from Ubisoft is loyalty to a lot of their titles in post-deployment. I talked Wednesday night about how freaking Riders Republic gets content, right? And I wrote that game off, within 30 days of it being launched. So, there are all types of things that they can continue to do. But like you said before, right? But what indications, I go back to I forget who was the guest that we had on the show who contended all these things were going to happen, from the Activision acquisition, Spyro and Crash and all these things. And I was like, what evidence do you have to lead you to believe that that's going to happen? And he admitted, right? It's just hope, right? And so that's my thing is, what indicators do we have that Xbox is going to make that commitment and that investment when we know that they've already pulled that team to go work on the next new thing, right? That's in pipeline. And the question is why would Xbox invest in that when it's one of so many games that are in Game Pass? Whereas when you look at Cyberpunk was do or die.
Yeah, and look at
Cyberpunk was.
Look how long it took for them to implement this performance patch. By the way.
Right.
Like I think that should give anyone some insight into their perspective or how valuable this IP is to them and how much time they want to expend. I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, you know what? This game's not a good game. Move on to the next project. I mean, I think it's nice that they did 60 FPS, but also look at the time it took for them to get that out. To me, that just doesn't seem like it's a high priority for something that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I can't remember if we had that discussion on the show or in the chat or just on Twitter in general. But Forte, I think, was with us when I said, no, I mean, everything says that from an accounting and a business perspective, you should just look at this as a sunk cost, write that expense off, take the hit, and move that team on to the next project.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Ricardo says BRAP, but people on PS5 they are playing Red Dead Redemption. Ricardo, not they are playing Red Dead Redemption, 60 frames. Okay, they're playing at 60 frames. Red Dead is also a good game.
Well, it's also a Rockstar game. It's also not a flagship. It's also not something Sony dangled in our face, right, for months, telling us this is a thing that you need to play.
No.
This is what we're delivering to retain your brand loyalty. Whereas I would say that was absolutely the marketing vector of Xbox, particularly as I said before, more and more of the releases that were supposed to have happened in the first half of 2023 didn't happen.
Yeah, it was their first big AAA release of the series consoles. Exclusive AAA release of the series console, Redfall was. Yeah, I just don't agree with the comparison of Cyberpunk. I mean, I understand people try to say, "Oh, can't a developer turn it around?" Look, games can be fixed, but I think the conversation's a bit more nuanced, which is my point, than just saying, "Oh, because Cyberpunk can do it." It's not too late. Cyberpunk did it. Well, no, I mean there are other factors into why Cyberpunk was able to do the things they did, or CD Projekt Red was able to do the things it did, and also the impact of those things too. I mean, again, at its core, there was a good game there. If you could play it, if you could get through some of the performance issues. Now, I played it on PC. I didn't have a lot of the performance issues that other people had on console at the time. I was playing on my 2070, and it was a good game. It was a really good game, and Phantom Liberty is the perfect send-off for Cyberpunk 2077. I mean, Phantom Liberty is phenomenal. I'm playing it right now. I'm enjoying it. It's one of the better games, content pieces that I played this year. Still, Baldur's Gate 3 is my game of the year, but Phantom Liberty's up there.
Yeah, and some of the comments in chat, it took them about 6 months. Jedi took about that long too. I mean, I'm right there with you guys, right? But I'm hoping that people heard my rant and my extreme pushback on the cast Wednesday when I said I'm not gonna entertain any discussions of Jedi Survivor being in the conversation for Game of the Year at the end of the year. That's look. How companies. We get a lot of people that say, well, games come out broken. That's just the way things are. Games get delayed. That's just the way things are. And I get that. However, I think in terms of, right, I've gone back and I've said, the one context where I think it's acceptable to use anti-consumer is when somebody has sold you a thing, right, and you've paid for it, and then they failed to deliver on what a reasonable expectation is to the follow-up for that. Now, admittedly, games don't have warranties. I've constantly pointed to that and tried to, go back to the legal lessons of that or people's expectations. But today, if you're going to accept that some games are going to deploy broken and some games are going to deploy imperfect, I'm like, okay. But then what I can do is I can compare how one studio responds to their release versus how another studio responds to their release, and at the publisher level. And in my opinion, the responsiveness of both Xbox and Respawn/EA in how they cared for games that people had paid for, to me, was below the threshold of what's acceptable. So I'm right there with you that Jedi Survivor took as long. I don't think how they responded to that was acceptable either.
Yeah, no, I don't either. And I don't think you should be nominated for Game of the Year. I agree with you there, Lutch. I don't think you should be nominated. I'd rather see Phantom Liberty get a nomination for Game of the Year over Jedi Survivor. That's another conversation. All right, so we're at 6:50. Logic, I do need to wrap up this rant because I need to head over to Crossfire. But any other maybe closing thoughts on Redfall?
Nope.
All right. By the way, we have like 90-something people watching, only 28 likes. Please smash that like button if you haven't done so already. If you're new, subscribe, hit the bell notification so you're alerted when we go live. And big thank you to everyone in the live chat. Again, Ricardo, Division was actually a good game. Division was, you're talking about games that were good despite not having 60 frames per second. That's the point. 60 FPS isn't going to make Redfall a better game per se. But no, I want to thank everyone in the live chat for coming by and hanging out with us this evening. This was very impromptu, so really appreciate it. And Logic, thank you again for your time. I'm sorry, the Architect, thank you for your time as well. I really appreciate it. And I will be heading over to Crossfire here that goes live in about 10 minutes or so. So head over to the Mooch's channel. I'll be there with Gaming Forte And I got to see who else he has on today. Let's see here. Mooch has on as guest. I think he's got quite a few. He's got like 12 topics, but we'll get through like 2 or 3 topics. Who does Mooch have on tonight? He's got Eric Jackson will be on. Pio, looks like Death Singer will be there. Gamers Gamut, Worrywart, and of course the Great Gaming Forte will be there as well. So that's the lineup for tonight's Crossfire. And so definitely head over there and tune in. So Logic, thank you again. And with the live chat, thank you again. And enjoy the rest of the weekend. Or actually say enjoy the weekend and have fun playing video games. And we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, man, have fun on Crossfire. I'm going to, while you're doing that, I'm going to go shop for and buy myself a 4070 Ti.
Are you really?
I am.
Oh, man. See, you know what? I'm not going to lie. I almost pulled the trigger on a 4090 the other day.
Ooh.
On a build.
Yeah, I'm flirting with. I think I'm gonna really.
It was about 3,500, I think, for the build that I put together. I'm gonna wait though. Yeah. I'm not pulling the trigger on the 40 series. I'm just gonna wait for the 50 series.
Yeah, man, that's a good move. That's a good move.
I mean, look, my 3070 is fine. Like I'm not. It's great.
No, I've told you you're Gucci. I'm only doing this because I've had it because I've been trying to run this one Radeon box and I've had it, and now I have other things that I've put at that battle station, right, with the monitor, and just put a 4 terabyte SSD in it, and I have things I don't want to go in this box and salvage. I'd rather put them in other machines. I'd just rather maybe put something at that workstation. So I'm thinking I'm going to not scrag the machine, but I'm going to get a 4070 Ti and shift some cards around. Is what I'm thinking I'm going to do.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. I mean, based on what you said to me, it sounds like, that particular GPU seems more trouble than what it's worth. I won't say the name of the GPU, but yeah. All right, you did say, you said Radeon, never mind. Yeah. All right, but no, that's cool, man. I did think about the 4090, and it's what's driving that FOMO. It's Cyberpunk, man. Cyberpunk is like the modern day Crisis. Like, and I want to be able to see what that game with the 4090, like enable path tracing and see what it can do with the 4090, or what the 4090 can do with path tracing enabled. I forgot a super chat here by your boy Roy with a $2 super chat. Is this cocktail hour before Crossfire? No, it is not cocktail hour before Crossfire. But no, thank you. I appreciate that.
I would disagree with you. This is. I think this is a.
Is it?
I think this is a good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Maybe, okay. Well, I forgot. Maybe. I didn't bring any drinks to the show. So.
Yeah, I don't know how often I'd be able to be here if we did it during that time. You'd normally have to take I would normally be taking my kid to swim.
Yeah.
Right now, but when I can be here, it's good.
Yeah. No. Yeah. So. All right. So, yep. Go ahead.
I know. I'm holding you up. Silver Rain asking, what card do you currently have? I don't know if I want to answer that question to the fullest extent. I'll say the top end card that I have is a 3080 Ti. But in getting a 4070 Ti, I'm not trying to replace the 3080 Ti. I'm slotting a card in somewhere else in my total system setup with some other machines. Yeah.
By the way, we should. Oh, never mind. That's a rumor. I'll talk about that on Wednesday. Never mind. All right, everyone. I do need to go to Crossfire. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Appreciate it. Remember, have a great weekend. Enjoy your time playing video games, because remember, that's what it's all about, having fun. And we will catch you next time. See you then. Thank you.